the location for it. So that will also go out company-wide. Some of the feedback we've gotten with respect to the sessions that to the broader audience as well. And so that everyone is aware, this audience is not just project managers, but through project architects, job captains, etc. So it is a broader audience than project management, but it does not include everyone in the entire company. However, the videos of this will be available to everyone. There's no secrets here. So once posted, I'll send it out and company-wide so that everybody can access that. And with that, I'm going to turn this session over to Jonathan, which is going to focus more on the coordination of the consultant aspect of things.
Thanks. So just a reminder from last time, we have a chat feature in the WebEx. If anyone wants to take advantage of it, I do have the window open so that if there are questions and folks don't want to speak up and they want to type them, I'm totally okay with that, and I'll answer them. Said the second session is going to focus on consultants. I really appreciate all the feedback that we got from the first session. We're going to send another survey too because I'm genuinely interested here in what folks think about how these are going and what other topics we could definitely talk about and try to a good resource to everybody on. So this session, this session is going to be about consultants, and there are a lot less slides in this session than on the last one, but they're quite a bit denser, and I think there's really a lot of good conversation around consultants that will probably start up here because I think it's a pretty complicated issue. It's a complicated issue for us even after 5 years of doing it and working with a huge range of consultants. And part of it is that sometimes you're going to be working with consultants in Revit and sometimes you're going to be working with consultants in CAD. And I wanted to sort of spend some time on both of those items because I realized that you're not always going to have an opportunity to have all of your consultants working in Revit. So the list of consultants that I'm dealing with today, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, and I'm sure that there's something on here I forgot, but these were the ones that most quickly came to my mind when I put the list together. So primarily, of course, most of us deal on nearly every project with MEP FP, and some other consultants that commonly pop up in the work that we do: structural, lighting, acoustics, food service, code, sustainability. I forgot to change this, so rather than rendering, I wanted to say visualization here, and we're going to talk a lot about that, and specifications, and again, I'm just no specific order to these. They were just as they popped into my head, and I'm sure that there's something else, and if someone thinks of another type of consultant they think is valuable for the discussion, I'm very happy to talk about it as well. So we're going to start with Revit consultants, and one of the places we're probably going to spend quite a bit of time today is on MEP FP. So here are some items, and let me sort of give a quick little background similar to I did last time on what we have done here. We do not allow MEP FP engineers any longer on our work to work in CAD. We go out to RFP, we require you are going to work in Revit, and that is what this project is. So it's a while since we actually worked on a job where we knew that the engineer was working in CAD. I think it still does happen here on some really small stuff, but on anything that is large or of any scope at all, we tell them to work in Revit, and part of that is because it allows for us to bring their model into ours, do coordination. There's a lot of dimensional coordination that can happen very easily once you have their model. But it does bring up a number of challenges. But before to those, let's talk a little bit. I wanted to sort of approach this from an RFP standpoint. So you're at the point you want to write your RFP, you're sending out to, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 MEP FP engineers, whatever your general practice is. And so what are some of the things that you need to think about in the RFP? So the first one is you need to tell them it's a Revit project, and in RFP I write it's literally in like first 3 sentences, and you need to include the Revit version. And this is something really critical for everybody to understand. Revit does not go backwards and forwards at all. If you are working in Revit 2012, and engineer says, oh, we're in 2011, it doesn't work. It's completely incompatible. You can't back save it. You also can't forward save it. So they can't say to you, we're in 2013, we're going to save it forward or anything like that. There is no compatibility at all. So you need to specify this is the version we're in, and if for some reason you were to upgrade your Revit version during the project, so you were to go from 2012 to 2013, you'd have to understand that that's going to have a huge impact on all of your consultants. So that's really important. Now, most of the larger engineering firms, at least that we've worked with, they sort of keep multiple versions of Revit going at any one given time. But this is also actually pretty important with something else we've run into last time, which is that oftentimes we now get models from other consultants, and this, in particular, if we're doing interiors on a project and there's a base building architect, we've run into where the base building architect is on the wrong version of Revit. So when they're kind of writing an RFP or even responding to an RFP, it's really important to understand what version of Revit we're talking about, because it's not that we can't accommodate other things, but once you start, you're kind of locked into it. And I will tell you that going forward, so you can take a 2012 model and save it as 2013, and that work one time to sort of upgrade the model, it is impossible to go backwards. So if you have a 2012 model and you've done all this work and you have to somehow get it to 2011, it's not possible. It's something you really need to be very concerned with, that I know is something that was sort of less of an issue. You could always kind of go back and forth, and there's kind of a number of options there that Revit does not allow. So that's kind of number one. Number two, Revit should not cost more. And I really, really want to push this one. They tell you it costs more. It is because they're not very comfortable with it. It means they haven't done a lot of work in Revit. They don't have a lot of experience. They may have a really strong Revit group. And so if they're trying to tell you there is an extra charge to do Revit, that is usually the reason. We have a very large, well, not very large, but relatively large engineering firm here in Boston that John Kells is going to be laughing into his mute button in a second because he knows who I'm talking about, who does not enjoy doing Revit. We'll leave it at that. And as a result, wants to add an additional charge onto every project that we do to Revit. It's not that they can't do it, they just don't like it. And so there's someone that I've shied away from. We need to work with them in some cases, but something very critical to look out for. So if there's a Revit surcharge, that's someone who is not comfortable. It doesn't take them longer, not know what they're doing. For you are going to need to give them a model for all areas they work in, not just where you work. This comes up all the time. So we'll be working on a project, say, on the second floor of a building, and that project will require a new gas main for a new kitchen we're putting in, and that gas main has to come down from the basement, and it has to come up through the first floor, and there's maybe not even any architectural modifications, but they need to show it. You either need to give them models of those lower levels so that they have a background they can work with, or, and we have done this, and this sort of goes back to the cheating conversation from last time, we have been able to give them CAD files occasionally if we've gotten the existing CAD file from the landlord as something just so diagrammatically where the route is going. We do sometimes do that in a pinch, but generally we try to provide a model for all the floors. Roof plans, this is a short one because keep in mind, you may not have an architectural roof plan, we may not have any architectural scope, but if they're putting a new mushroom cab up there, they need a plan of that, and if we don't have it in the model, we need to be able to provide them with that. So that's something you need to be able to think about when you're sort of putting your pricing together, that we may have to produce that so that we can give it to the engineers. Find how many Revit projects they've done and ask for examples. I do this all the time. Ask for a list, sizes, what have you done, what was the scope, where is it in Revit, give me 5. tell me when you completed them, how long ago, blah, blah, blah. I learned sort of that really helps you suss out who can do it and who can't, because a lot of the times you'll hear things like, well, we sort of did this project where we did the started in Revit and we put it in CAD and we did the CDs in CAD. And that's something that you need to really watch out for when you're really interviewing, or you're sort of even just discussing with the engineers moving forward on where you want to be for this work. Do not be their pilot project. So we're piloting Revit is a huge no-no for me. Don't be that situation. You know, Revit MEP, and not to get too technical for a second, but just to, Revit MEP is like Revit architecture times 4, because every trade has its own interface. There is a learning curve, and it's pretty steep. And it, you know, many of the large engineers in Boston, whether it's Van Gaal or Flack and Kurtz, R.W. Sullivan, or RDK, or whoever it is, have been doing Revit for 6 or 7 years, and it shows. And when you run into someone who has been doing it for a year, you know, and we have those firms here, you see the difference, and it's pretty significant. And you know, obviously, it's our best interest to get the best product for our client, and to be able to get a competitive fee that we can win the job with. And so all of those things need to factor into the decision that you're making. And all of that sort of leads to number 6, which is if you are not confident they can do the job in Revit, then they can't. They need to convince you. So if you haven't worked with them before, if you don't have any experience with them working in Revit, and there's someone new, which is totally fine. We do it all the time. We just started working with a brand new engineering firm on Google for one of the Google jobs we're doing. Never worked with them before, but as part of the presentation that they gave when they came into interview, the thing they did was talk about how much they love Revit, and they went through tons of examples, and we do this and we do that. And one of the things that they really sold me on was how well they wanted to do Revit, and I have to say they were totally right. And now we're probably 2/3 of the way through the project, and I am continually amazed, and I was very impressed. We went there last week for a coordination meeting, and they had the model open, and they were going through things, and it was great. It's been a great experience working with them from that standpoint. So, but they need to convince you. You need to be very skeptical. You need to start with the assumption that they don't know what they're doing and that they can't use Revit, and need them to convince you. And that is very, very important. They have to sell you on their ability to do it. And the last piece here that's very important from a scheduling and fee standpoint. So with a CAD file, you can sit there and say, oh, we're going to update the engineer, we're going to send them the ceiling plan for this floor, and that's a, I don't know, 1.5 meg CAD file, and we'll just send it to them. It doesn't really work that way. The P model is probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 100 meg. Your architectural model is going to be 100 to 120 meg. When you send that model to the engineers, it takes them literally a day or two just to get it distributed to all the different trades, to take a look at it, to go through it, to find what has been changed, even if you've given them a narrative or you've given them some kind of a PDF markup set, which we commonly do. And so there is time there. So you need to make sure that you're not running a situation where it's like we're going to check in every other day. They probably, when you look at your schedule, you want to set some very clear milestones. We do it with percentages. Commonly, recently, we've been doing 80%, 90%, and 100%, and we might have had a 70% at one point on one of them, and saying, okay, these are some things that we expect at those percentages that we'd like to see, and these are the dates, and we do that right at the beginning, and we say this is what the schedule is, and everyone understands that it's always going to change because clients are out of control, but at least you set an expectation for them that they can work towards. And I think we all sort of want to do that anyway, and I think that's best practice even when you're working in CAD, but I want to emphasize it's much more significant here because there's time. I mean, it takes minutes. It can take sometimes up to a half hour for us to just download this new model, get it copied to where we need it in the server, get it relayed back into our model. So there is there is some real time every single time the model gets sent back and forth. So you really want to create a schedule and create a system where you don't have to do that 3 times a week, because it's going to end up bogging you down so significantly, and they won't be able to get any work done in between. And that's a little different from sort of CAD world, where I think it was a little easier to do that because you could send one drawing, or you could send this, or you could send that. Revit doesn't really give you that kind of flexibility. I think that's also very important. Is there any questions on MEP, FP? I know it's a pretty big subject, and there may be questions later, but I wanted to stop if there were. Yeah, and one thing to also just point out, the engineering modules in general in Revit MEP is not as mature an application as Revit architecture, and what that means is that sometimes they run into things that just flat out don't work. It's getting a lot better. It's gotten much better in the last year and a half to 2 years. A couple of years ago, they were the piping module that didn't work at all, and they literally couldn't do piping, and it was kind of a mess in the Revit world. So unfortunately, sometimes we do still run into that occasionally. There are far fewer bugs kind of in the Revit architecture world. There's still a number of them in Revit MEP. In 3 major Revit categories: architecture, MEP, and structural. MEP is the newest of the 3. Architecture is the oldest. Structural was after that. So, sometimes, again, this is something that, you need to have a lot of ongoing conversation with your MEP engineer and how's it going? What are we running into here? What are we running into there? So that we don't have any surprises at the end of the project. Okay. Moving forward. Structural. Do it in CAD. That's my best piece of advice for all interiors work. Now, if you're doing base building architecture, it's a different conversation. And if anyone on the phone, if you have a ground-up project, you absolutely want to do structural in Revit. It's key. Revit structural is wonderful. There are many great structural engineering firms that can do it. For interiors work, you need to do it in CAD. And the reason that you want them to do it in CAD is because if you ask them to do it in Revit structurally, they have to build the entire structure of the building, which you are not going to be building, because Revit architecture, as much as it does sometimes, you can in some structural columns and so on and so forth, it doesn't contain 90% of the information that they actually need to produce the structure of a Revit model for Revit structural. But what they end up doing is doing so much work to, say, reinforce a slab for a Liebert unit, or to cut an opening for a connecting stair, or to put a lintel because you have a piece of ductwork that's going to go through a masonry wall. The number of very small structural items that come up in interiors work very commonly. Reinforcement for a high-density filing unit. These are things that are in the structural world are very, very simple projects, and there's really no reason they can't do it in CAD. My recommendation is, after you've done that work, if it's something that is architecturally critical, so connecting stairs are a good example of this, we will then take their information, and there is Revit comes with these. It's with all of the default structural steel shapes, and so you can have your team go back in and put in, if they call it a W14 by 68 or whatever it is, you can have your team go back and put that in our model, so that if you're worried about head clearances, or you're worried about, making sure that we have it coordinated correctly, you can put those steel pieces in there, which help us from a coordination standpoint. But you really don't want to do that. The fee for them to do it in Revit is going to be off the charts compared to if they did the work in CAD, and it's just something to really watch out for. Okay. So, lighting design. We have done a lot of work recently with lighting designers. We have done a lot of Revit work with lighting designers, and in those cases, we have the light designers own a lighting model, which is an additional model all of the various Revit models that is linked into model and contains literally all of the light fixtures, and that same model can then be sent to the MEP engineer for electrical, and it's not the most seamless process in the world, but we're getting much better at it, and it does have a lot of advantages because there is really clean up a lot of coordination, but it creates new challenges, so I wanted to talk about some of that. So, like MEP FP, you need to give them the version of Revit. We talked about that. And you want them to actually build a model. If they're working in CAD, it sort of defeats the purpose, and we can talk a little bit about how that would work later. You find out their capabilities. Do they build their own content, or are they using things they download? We run into this. Thing that we sort of push in general here is we're not a big fan of just downloading content and popping it in the model. So that's something just in general that we don't encourage here. But light fixtures, obviously, there's a lot of different ways to which they can build the fixture, and many of the lighting consultants are smaller operations, small companies, and so a lot of the times they will hire out sort of third party on their end to build their light fixtures. And you just want to sort of get information there. Some of the things that you can run into are, we've run into where, they'll have an outside consultant edit a light fixture. In doing so, he'll accidentally change the mounting height of the fixture. No one will catch it. The heights will be all wrong, and it will show up wrong in all of our elevations. So we've run into that. It's important to know who's doing what, and that way at least, it's less about blame and more about being able to trace the problem. So part of what we sort of ask for in the RFP is are you building your own content? Is that something you from? Is it something that, are you just randomly downloading light fixtures from manufacturers? Because, you don't want them to be designing based on what they can and can't download in Revit. So just because they can't download a fixture doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to use it. So these are important questions to ask. Sequence is really, really important. And a lot of it has to do with how the project is being designed and what role the lighting plays, what role the mechanical plays. If you're doing a project where, you've got a space and it's a giant 2x2 ceiling and it's 2x2 lay-in fixtures and it's a big sea of grid ceiling, then you're probably not all that worried about significant amounts of coordination as it pertains to lighting and MEP. You're more worried about ceiling height, just making sure that everything fits up there. If you're doing a project that has a million soffits and floating clouds and open ceiling and all of those types of wonderful things, then you really have to focus on what is the sequence that the model has to be essentially passed around so that everyone can do their work correctly. And the scheduling challenge. And my best piece of advice is you need to talk to engineers about what can they do without having it affect something else, and set a priority. So, for example, we are doing a large project for Google, and we have set a priority on that project, which is that heat pumps are first, heating is second, and everything else is after that. So we had the MEP engineer lay out the heat pumps. We sort of worked through that heat pump design based on what we wanted our ceilings to do. Then we gave it to the lighting people. The lighting people came up with the lighting design. Then we gave it back to the engineer and said, okay, this is where your lighting is going to be. We, the engineer, okay, you're not going to get the lighting. You're going to be working on mechanical, work on fire protection, work on plumbing, wait on electrical. You can do power, but wait on lighting. It's a little different from sort of the old approach, which is you do a power plane, you do a ceiling plane, you hand it to the engineer, and you sort of say, go. In this case, and sort of in the Revit, you can start to separate these things, and they don't all happen at once. because, of course, the engineer is working on different trades, and they can work on the model simultaneously, and because the coordination is sort of going to happen anyway in the model, you're sort of less worried about the 2D concern of the different engineering trades talking to each other, because they're actually working physically in the same model, and there's a coordination check that's going on as they're doing it. It's not that we don't have problems, but the sequence is very critical. So when you're doing your schedule, again, a lot of this depends on the size of the project, but I like to make sure that the lighting folks have a deadline that is a week prior to whenever I want my electrical drawings to be done. So I would back up lighting a full week before that, and I say, okay, the 100% lighting model needs to be done at least a week before the final electrical drawings are done. And then I have lighting on 70, 80, 90% issuances that are a week before the MEP issuances. And again, if the project is very small, maybe you don't have quite as wide a timeline, but you need to be able to sort of plan that out ahead of time, put a schedule together. We do it in Outlook. We just do a little Outlook project calendar, and we sort of look at it and go, okay, we have 5 weeks for CDs, or we have 4 weeks for CDs, or whatever it is, and this is when we are delivering models to people. This is when they are delivering models back to us, and we publish that. And it's something that we continue to kind of reinforce, talk about, and we have several coordination meetings which we schedule right at the beginning that say, okay, this is when we're going to be in the room. We're going to talk about all of the different items and all the different, sort of coordination items that we have to do with. It is a little bit time consuming. I'm not going to hide from that. But if you do it, it will save you on the back end. It removes changes, it removes buys, it removes all of those other things that take a lot of time during construction, or that at the 11th hour of the project will cause you to have a drawing set that, you've got people there till 2 o'clock in the morning because you're trying to get things changed, that everything will align. There may be a little bit of an extra cost here with lighting designers, especially if you are actually asking them to produce actual drawings, which we don't commonly do. We ask them to produce the model, and then their model shows up on our reflected ceiling plans. So it is something that, the lighting design world, they're not all Revit yet, so make sure you ask these questions at the beginning. I see your little note here. Do you want to jump in and talk about what you're me here?
Yeah, this is John Kells. One of the things I wanted to mention that we've run into is our MEP engineers getting a little flustered with the fact that when we upload our model, including the lighting model, what we do is we actually do not incorporate the model into our model. We actually have that as a referenced link. It has a little bit more. It's a little bit more difficult for the MEP engineers to manage, but there really is no other way for us to do it and be able to accept or manage future lighting revisions from the lighting consultant if we incorporate their model into ours. Once we do that, we then own the lighting model and have to make updates and revisions within our model moving forward, or we have to be able to go through and remove everything that was in the lighting model so that they can send us an update at a later date. So we've had engineers who are very good engineers, and we respect them, and I think they're pretty technically savvy. They've asked us to do a step, and we've had to go back and pretty forcefully say, no, it's not in the best interest of you, us, or the project to make this move. And I just wanted to put that out there, that this is something that you might run into as well, and you really want to make sure that we're working with all the consultants. We're using linked files that allows the consultants to continue to develop the project and allows the project to move forward in a way that minimizes the duplication of effort.
And that's a really good example of why the meeting, at the beginning of the project, and oftentimes I know you always have kickoff meetings. Part of your kickoff meeting needs to include talking about Revit. And you need to have your model manager, you need to have the Revit people. Don't just have the engineer's project manager who doesn't even know how to open the software. You need their Revit person, you need the London people's Revit person, everyone who is going to contribute to the model. You get in a meeting and you basically sit down, you go through the schedule I'm talking about, you go through who's linking to what. We oftentimes on the biggest stuff have drawn diagrams about which model links into which one. There are things called BIM execution plans, which John just texted me, which I know is something that DTS is trying to sort of put a template together for. We have done them. We don't always do them, I'll be very honest, but they are good ideas. If it's a small project, they can get a little bit wieldy, but there are streamlined versions you can use. But if nothing else, you need to have a meeting, and you need to sit down, especially if it's not someone you've worked with before, and discuss, this is who owns what. This is who owns what in the model. And that has to happen right at the beginning. If it's a situation where you're going for an RFP response and you know, we have a chosen engineer, you can even talk about it as part of the RFP response. And you can put it in the RFP and say, these things that, you know, we're proposing, this is how it's going to be structured in very general terms. And sometimes that's good information for a client. It all depends. But these are things that do contribute to the amount of time you are going to spend. And if it's not very well organized, it's something that has a tendency to just run off on a life of its own. Okay. Sticks. Generally, it's all about scope. We right now have been very limited in our usage of acoustics engineers. We, in this office, have not done any auditoriums or anything like that required a lot of acoustical drawings. So the tendency here has been to sort of let the acoustical engineers do what they want. Primarily it's been, you know, they've worked in CAD when they've wanted to issue a sketch or a detail of something that they thought was relevant to the project that we've done. So I don't have a lot of experience, unfortunately, to offer on working in Revit with acoustical engineers, and maybe some folks out there might, and we can certainly open up the floor on that. If anyone does, you know, have something, I'd be very interested to hear in the future if you have a project that starts to engage acoustical engineers from the Revit standpoint, because that would be something I'd be very interested in. Food service. This is a big one. I've jokingly told people that in the last 2 years of Google, I have spent more time working with food service consultants than all in the years I did restaurants. Love the large food service consultants that we now work with. So the Cine Littles, the Trimarks, those national folks use Revit, and they're actually very good at it. And it's a huge advantage because most of their equipment is built in Revit. So if you want to do a quick, say, scene vision, you know, of your K and or your area, most of the equipment that they will put on their plan, if not all of it, is already in 3D. It's very well built, and they deliver it to you as a Revit model that you can link right into your model. So you don't need to draw any of their equipment. You don't need to show anything in your model. It all comes right in as an underlay. We can control what it looks like, so you can gray it out. There's kinds of things you can do with that, and then all we provide them is textual elements. So we make sure that walls, doors, windows, so on and so forth, ceilings, all right in our model that we give to them, and they place their equipment. All the equipment that they have, it all has embedded information in it. It makes it very easy for them to do their schedules, their specs. You can transfer it to the engineer, who then can pull that same information. He's got all his electrical loads. He's got what his plumbing requirements are. He's got what his heat loads are, so we can calculate HVAC. All of the types of things. Now, going back to the previous conversation, again, this is someone else who has to be in that initial meeting, because we have to talk about what is the sequence of when the food service model is presented to the rest of the team and how is it passed around. terms of how it actually works out, we've found it to be very, very seamless. And we have worked with two of the largest food service consultants and had a lot of really good success with it. Revit did not cost extra here at all. In fact, I have seen extremely aggressive pricing